And he asked the question, but who is my neighbor? You see, to the Jews, the only neighbor that they had to be concerned with was other Jews. Other nationalities were not considered even equal to them as neighbors. They were considered less than human. The Samaritans, the Phoenicians, all of their neighboring nations around them, they were not even considered to be on an equal footing with the rest of the Jews. And so here is this man who's asking Jesus, but who is my neighbor? And Jesus doesn't give him a direct answer, as we said, but instead proceeds to tell this story or this parable about a certain man that was on the way from Jerusalem to Jericho. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho is a winding road. It is known as the Bloody Pass, simply because it was a perfect setting for people that would rob others, that would walk down that road, for muggers, for criminals, because you would be able to hide in so many places and be able to just run off. When he begins to relay the story, he doesn't answer who the neighbor is, but he reverses the question. It's not about who is my neighbor, but he reverses the question to say, the question isn't who is my neighbor, but who am I being a neighbor to? That's the question that Jesus was trying to get across with the story. And so often we are left wondering. We often justify our treatment of others or what we do to others dependent on whether they deserve it or not, whether they're the ones that are requiring or not. So often our treatment of others is predicated on the fact of whether they deserve it, whether they're our loved ones, whether they're the ones that we should be caring for. But Jesus was reversing the question. It says it doesn't matter if they deserve it or not. It's regardless of whether those people are worthy to receive anything from us. But what really matters is, are we being a neighbor to those that are in need around us? Are we the ones that are showing forth the goodness of God and the love of God to others that are around us? Jesus was basically saying it doesn't matter who it is, because your neighbor is the person that you see every day, is the person that you see and that you have contact with every day, that needs help, that is in need of help from the children of God and the people of God. And I want to tell you that this certain man is like the world. This is where the world is at. The world is hurting. The world is standing by the roadside. They have been robbed and they have been stolen and they have been killed and left to die on the side of the road by the devil himself. And I'm here to tell you that we have to be like that Samaritan. We have to reach out to those that are in need. It doesn't matter whether they deserve it or not. It doesn't matter whether they look like us or they're good or they're bad. But what matters is, are we doing what's inside of us? Are we allowing the spirit of love and this neighborly attitude to emanate out of us? Jesus commands us to love. And we so often put limitations on the love of God, but Jesus gives us exactly who to love. He says you're to love one another. Then he says you're to love your neighbor. And then he says you're to love your enemy. He gives us this spectrum of what kind of people to love. It's so easy. Yes, anybody can love those that would love them back. But can you love the unlovable? This is the ultimate test of the love of God. Are you able to look at your enemies and tell them sincerely, I forgive you. I love you with the love of God. My thoughts about you are not negative thoughts. I don't want to think curses towards you simply because we don't get along or you're my enemy. But whoever your enemy is, whoever it is that stands in your way, you've got to love them. What we want people to give to us, we've got to sow. Your hardest enemy, your worst enemy in your life right now, if you go to them and come to them with genuine love in your heart and to ask for forgiveness and to think really good thoughts, I'm telling you, any hardness that they have towards you, any anger or bitterness or resentment they may have towards you will dissipate under the love of God that you would emanate to them. The story talks about a Levite and a priest who came, and a Samaritan. A little bit of knowledge of the ancient world will help us to understand that Jerusalem was a place that united them. It was a love place, a place of love. A love of a holy place in particular, a religious love. And the Levite and the priest were officials in the temple of Jerusalem. So they had just come from their temple services. They had just come from their obligation as a priest and as a Levite, coming back. And we can understand that in Israel that there was a rotational sort of rosters for priests and Levites. So having served their time in Jerusalem, they were no doubt heading home, coming out of Jerusalem. And they'd come from the presence of God. They had come from the temple of God. They had come from a place, and their law states that you cannot touch anybody that was unclean, especially if you'd come from the temple. So when they saw this man that was wounded, that was bleeding, that was left for dead, they looked around perhaps. They looked on both sides, and there's nobody there. It wasn't going to ruin their reputation, but they walked the other side and left the man there. Perhaps it was their love for their religion, or their religiosity, that kept them from helping this man. But yet there was this Samaritan. The Samaritans, we understand, were not the same as Jews. In fact, they were rejected by the Jews. And they believed that the holy place, the temple where they should worship, was not Jerusalem, but was built on Mount Gerizim, about 30 miles north of Jerusalem, at a place called Shechem. And that, they believe, was the true dwelling place of God. And this passion for the holy place or another was enough to divide them bitterly. But yet the Samaritan, when he saw this man in need, he came to him. He gave, the Bible says, he bound up his wounds. He poured in oil and wine, which signifies a healing medication, upon this man. And he cared for him, took him to an inn, gave the guy enough money so that when he would recover, the man would be okay. And I've simply come to tell this congregation today that we must be the Samaritan. That there is this hurting world out there, and what we have in this house is the healing balm of Gilead. This is not a place where they come and are turned off and are offended by others, by attitudes, but this is a place that every person that walks through this door, every visitor that comes, they ought to be welcomed, and they ought to be bombarded by love. They ought to be bombarded by a healing love that says, I was rejected in the world. I came from all kinds of abuse, but when they come through these doors, let us open our arms. Let us allow the love of God to reach them. This year, as we start this new year, every single one of us is called to heal and to help. When Jesus started his ministry, he stood up and he read from Isaiah, and he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor and to heal, not the sick, he said, to heal the brokenhearted.